Welcome back. So in Module 1, we talked about this concept of identity security perimeter. In this module, we are going to take a step further, and we're going to look at how to go about building that identity security perimeter. We're going to go and take a step further and learn how do we go about building identity security perimeter. And doing a little recap, so we talked about the risk to identity perimeter around your application, your data, your devices, and also your device. So just to do a little recap, so we talked about the risk associated with identity perimeter, right? So we talked about your application, your devices. We talked about infrastructure, your data, and how you need to be cognizant to make sure your data is protected regardless of where it is. You get visibility into your SaaS applications, so regardless of whether those are sanctioned or those are unsanctioned SaaS applications. So let's go and dive into and look at how do we go about building that identity security perimeter. Mark?
Sure. So when you look at an identity perimeter, and what are the most important challenges that you have to address, and the most important protections? The most important challenges are really primarily around phishing and around credential theft. And phishing really is an identity attack because it comes over email, absolutely. Mm-hmm. But when it comes in, as soon as that adversary is able to get you to go to that website and run that website, or to be able to run that code if it's an attachment, they are running as you. They're impersonating you right away. And so those phishing emails are really a powerful way for adversaries to bypass and get inside that perimeter. So protecting against that's critical. The other piece is you need to have intelligence. You need to be able to have all that context as you do authentications. And then, of course, the last piece there is credential theft. And that's where that privilege access roadmap comes into play, where we talked about with the major incidents and the typical techniques that we see there. Go ahead.
Let's go a little bit deeper into, so when we think about phishing, in a historical sense, attacker would, host some malicious content somewhere, will create this sort of bad link and use, spam, hoping that some of the users would go and click on that link.
Yep.
Now, what we are seeing today is sort of the evolution of that phishing is where the attackers, the adversaries understand that, hey, there's a big security stack looking for URL reputation, looking for those malicious links in that email. So what they are doing today is they'll go and send you a link, which is all good. There's no malicious content there, right? There's no malware there. Everything is good to start with. So when that email flows through that traditional security stack,
it gets the green light.
It gets the green light, right? Yeah. So, and the opportunity for the attacker is the fact that not each and every user would go and click on that link the very moment it lands in their inbox. Some of them would go, 5 minutes after, some of them would go 6 hours after, or maybe a day or two after.
Yeah.
And that's the opportunity for the attacker, right? So they're using the fact that there's a time gap between when the email is arriving and when the user is actually clicking on the link to convert that good content to bad content. So when the user clicks on it, they get infected. How do we go about, protecting the users in real time, right? That's a challenge.
Exactly, because that time of send is great, but if the adversary has control of where that link goes, well, it's really about the time of click that you need that protection from. And that's where the Safe Links feature in Office 365 Advanced Threat Protection comes into play, because it rewrites all those links that come in from the outside, from these dangerous sources, so that it can check and see if what's actually at the other end of that link is good at the time that the user clicks on it, before they actually execute it through the lifetime of that email.
So the users are protected regardless of when they go and click on that link.
Exactly. And then we also have, of course, detonation, what's known as detonation chamber protection. Mm-hmm. So the attachments and all the binaries that are accessible because of that email go through that detonation chamber and see, okay, in a sandbox, does this act like a normal document or a normal PDF or a normal Excel file, or is it running code and macros that are calling out to the internet, which is very unusual and usually a sign of attack. So all of those kind of things are built into that service. And honestly, this is the state of the art of today, and the attackers may find a way around this, may come up with something creative, and that's where the cloud services are really committed to keeping up with it for the current attacks as well as the ones that evolve.
So if you think about identity protection, or sort of protecting that identity at the front door, if you will, right?
Yep.
So it's imperative that we're not just using user ID and password, it's safe to assume that the passwords are already compromised nowadays. And you have
We don't
to,
want them to be, but it's an
right?
assumption you have to make.
And then if you're living in that sort of world, we have to go beyond user ID and password. We got to be able to look at the context, whether it's device, the location that the user is coming from. We also must be able to use the intelligence that's available to us in the cloud, right? And we need to bring it all together to understand if an authentication attempt is legit or whether there's any malicious behavior associated with it. And then we should be able to take an action based on that, whether to do multi-factor authentication, whether to let the user in, or whether to block that particular authentication attempt in some scenarios.
Exactly, because that context of that authentication is very important. Whether it had the multi-factor authentication, is it a trusted device? That's critical to making a good decision in today's world where the password could be stolen or a device could be stolen. How do we bring in as much context as we can to make a good decision? Think of it like a guard, in an office building. If someone comes in, they have the right badge, but they don't look like the picture, or they're not dressed like a business person, those are signals that we as humans have that we can make a good decision as people come in the front door. But in the electronic world, we also have to educate these identity systems to make sure they have that context. So it's not just, oh, you have the badge and I'm going to let you in. We're making an intelligent decision before we allow that authentication or that authorization to happen.
Now, at the same time, sort of this conditional access concept, right? So we talked about different signals, whether it's devices, whether it's location. And really the goal here is to be able to provide that ability to our customers to leverage all those signals, turn them into policies so that they can take desired action based on the outcome.
And enforce those policies and say, you know what, if this is coming from an unusual location or meeting a couple of other suspicious criteria, we're going to force it to proof up to MFA, or we're going to make them come in from a different device, or whatever makes sense for your organization's policy.
What about identities on premises? Think about a typical way adversary would go about getting into an organization and then they move laterally, right? Think about pass the hash, pass the ticket. Those attacks are so common out there, and still most of the organizations are vulnerable to those attacks.
Yes, and that's a piece of it that's super critical, is protecting those on-premises identity systems. Usually an Active Directory, frequently some other identity management that synchronizes the identities and the passwords and the permissions across across the enterprise. Protecting those and protecting the administrators of those is super critical, because we see that abused, like I said, with our incident response team week after week. We're seeing the same patterns of attacks. And so protecting that core, that original source identity, is also very, very important, so that the adversaries can't bypass the system at the source. And that's where we built that prescriptive guidance that says exactly, what do I do in the first 30 days? What do I do in the first 90 days to protect myself against these attacks? And that's our Securing Privileged Access Roadmap. Highly recommend that you follow that guidance and protect yourselves, and then continue on, and then also embrace all these modern technologies as well. And as we take a moment to kind of break down, when we look at identity security actually means a couple different things. And we want to make sure it's clear that there are a couple different components to it. The very first part is simply the identity systems, as I mentioned, protecting that core. The next component is protecting the accounts that are on them. And some of those accounts have control of the identity system, such as your administrators, your domain admins, your enterprise admins. Frequently, a lot of management tools and security tools have the ability to control domain controllers in Active Directory. So protecting those admins as well is really part of the identity systems problem. But there's other accounts that have different impacts and have different use profiles. And so those accounts is a different part of protecting or identity security, really, because you got the identity systems, you got the accounts on them. And then the last piece that we're discussing today, if you want to advance the slide for a moment, is really the identity perimeter. And this is where identity has a new role, effectively, in this new world, because it's not just held in the four walls of the classic network security perimeter, because the identity is extended out onto the cloud and onto these services and onto these devices, and it's the control that really gives access to the data. You have to use the identity controls that are in your applications. You have to use the ones that are on your devices, the ones that are built in the infrastructure. And you have to be able to say, okay, when someone tries to access this resource, they need to proof up, they need to MFA or what have you on this app. And when they're coming in from a device, we need to have that signal on whether the device is trusted. we need to have all of these things. And there are identity controls, authentication, authorization throughout all of these different components. And so that's the new role that people are getting used to in terms of what does identity security mean? Well, it's this identity perimeter. And that's kind of that third part that you have to deal with.
Oh,
now.
I totally agree. And I think, so what does that identity security perimeter means to me as a so what does that identity security, what does that identity security perimeter mean to me, right? So let's take a deeper look at it. And really the idea is, how do you go about protecting at the very front door, which is where the users are authenticating into your application, again, whether it's on premises or whether it's somewhere in the cloud.
Yep.
Let's take a look at what protection at the front door means, right, in the context of that identity security perimeter.
Yes.
All right. So first you have these users, right? And when I'm talking about users, so those could be your enterprise users, those could be your partners, your consumers. So essentially, we are talking about B2B, B2E, and B2C scenarios, right? So first of all, you should be able to support all of these scenarios.
Business to consumer, and business to?
Enterprise, so your enterprise users.
Ah, okay, gotcha.
Right? And then we also talked about these conditions, right? So we talked about the user ID and password is just not sufficient to properly authenticate the users.
Yep.
So we are providing these conditional policies and bringing the context, those signals that we talked about. Your location, your device state, your user group membership could be one of the signal as well, right? You may want to treat certain group of people differently from an authentication perspective than other users. Then you also have this concept of risk. Let's take all of this information, understand whether it's a normal behavior for the user or whether it's an abnormal one in context with the risk, and then leverage that to make policy decisions, right? So which could be the risk is low, so you're going to allow the access, or the risk is medium to high, and you want to enforce some sort of multi-factor authentication. You may want to challenge the user with, a phone call or sending a text message or a push notification. So flexibility.
I believe you, but only if you can prove that you have your phone.
Absolutely, right?
Okay.
So that's the second factor, right? So you got to have your own device, right? So that's the reason we are saying this is multi-factor authentication. Or in certain scenarios where the risk is high, maybe the user is coming in from a compromised device, maybe they're coming in from, a compromised IP, or maybe the identity itself is compromised, right? So then you may want to just block the access to mitigate that in real time.
Yeah, and then, it's an extreme case, but yeah, you absolutely want to have that option.
Now, at the same time, we also talked about some other functionalities that this identity security perimeter is going to provide. So think about some basic stuff like single sign-on. Who would want to go and authenticate, 10 different times so they can log into these 10 applications, right? Would you want to do that, Mark?
Oh, that's a horrible experience.
And we know that that's the scenario, if you look at your SaaS application, an organization may be using 10, 20, 30 different SaaS applications, right? We can act as an identity broker in that particular scenario and provide that single sign-on experience going into those third-party SaaS application, or they could be application on premises as well. Now think about the user experience.
So I don't
here,
have to remember 30 passwords for 30 different services effectively. Absolutely.
So there are a few benefits here, right? One is that user experience where I am logging in only one time, and assuming that I am authorized to access these applications, I'm just able to seamlessly, access those applications once I'm authenticated and authorized. Fair? But from a security perspective, it also gives you a central visibility into what the users are doing and how they are interacting and which applications are they interacting with. So think about from a visibility perspective, instead of going and trying to get that visibility in silos from all of these individual applications, you're actually able to go to one place and get that visibility.
And see what's happening, look for the patterns, and of course feed those signals. Now, the other thing that I really like about this is I'm a big proponent of security and productivity. There's no choice. It's not security or productivity. It has to be security and productivity because the users, one, it's the right thing to do for the business, but two, the users have the option now and they can vote with their feet, they can vote with their devices and do something else. So if we make this a great experience where they can access all the services they want, they don't have to log in a lot, and we get that visibility and control of the services of the security folks, that's a powerful, powerful solution because it helps security enable a business.
Yep, so that's a great segue into my next slide, which is security is not just about creating those brick walls or creating more restrictions, if you will, right? Security is also about increasing the productivity and user experience. So let's take a deeper look into how we can enable businesses to do that, right? So we talked about threat intelligence earlier, right?
Yes.
So we have a very rich set of contextual information available within Microsoft Cloud, right? So we have a lot of telemetry just because of the nature of business we are in, right? So whether it's ability to go and see millions of authentications happening in the cloud, or whether it's telemetry coming from our Windows devices, if you will, right? Or whether it's just our DCU team, our digital crime unit, and our SOC guys working together with third-party government agencies to take down botnets, as an example. So that brings in a lot of that intelligence. So I'll give you an example. We may very well know that a given identity is compromised based on that the botnet takedown operation that we were involved in, or maybe we have visibility into that, hey, this is a compromised IP, right?
And we also monitor, a paste bin and other places where when there's a data dump and there's a bunch of passwords released, we monitor that so that our systems can detect, is this going to actually impact any of our customers as well? So we have a lot of sources that we pull from.
So, and that is the information that we can proactively bring into this identity protection system. So think about a scenario where we know that the credentials are compromised. Now we can provide our customers the ability to go and define policies to mitigate that situation. It could be enforce a password reset using multi-factor authentication. Think about what you have done here. You have enhanced the user experience because they don't have to go and make a call and say, hey, there's something which is happened with my account. I need a password reset. Wait for an email to come. Click on that link.
I hate calling the help desk.
Right?
So I get you. Yeah. If I can do that automatically on my own, don't have to call and wait on hold. Love it.
Right. So you would agree that that's increasing productivity and enhancing user experience.
Absolutely.
At the same time, from a security perspective, you have mitigated that threat automatically, right? You provided visibility into that account was compromised, that's one, but at the same time, you were able to automatically mitigate that particular situation.
And you reduce the risk on that account without having to pay someone to answer the help desk phone, without having to have the user be paid to sit on hold. I love it.
And really the security, when we think about security, we don't think about creating brick walls or creating restrictions. We always want to think about security in context with the business. How can we help enable your business in new, innovative ways that just weren't possible before?
Excellent. And this is just a view of how some of these capabilities that we've been discussing fit into the reference architecture. Obviously, there's a lot more capabilities than we have time for even in this course to discuss. We are posting a copy of the full reference architecture slide, and you do have the ability to hover over each of the different elements and then click on them to get at more resources to understand these. So keep in mind that those components are going to be available to you.
Well, so we have talked about identity, Mark, right? So I think this is a good segue to get into and start talking about applications, right? So again, from an application perspective, there are two categories of challenges that our customers are facing today. One is, how do I get visibility into this third-party, SaaS application or so-called shadow IT, right? Unsanctioned apps.
Yep.
The second is around the overall management aspect of, using those SaaS application, right? So how do I implement right set of controls from a security perspective so I know what is going on, what kind of threats exist?
So if I approve an app, if I sanction it, if I deploy Office 365 or some other SaaS application, how do I secure and manage that?
Absolutely, and you have to think about the entire life cycle, right? And it starts with, first you got to be able to discover what SaaS usage is happening in your environment, right?
Yep.
I mean, that's really the foundation, so that you have complete visibility into these are the SaaS applications, good or bad, that are in use in my environment.
Yep.
And if you go further, then you need the ability to be able to go and do investigations, right? You have to understand, maybe this application is in use, but the security associated with this application is low because perhaps they're not using, modern SSL standards, as an example, right? Or maybe they do not enforce multi-factor authentication. So,
or is it only 2 users, or is it 1,000? How much is this actually being used? How important is this to the business?
And then that leads into the ability to then define policies so that you can control the SaaS users in your environment. How do you get visibility into if there's any sensitive data which is sitting on public-facing internet sites?
Yeah.
Right? That's a challenge. And we all know the nature of data. It is going to go and land at all of these different places that you can imagine.
And when users are trying to, when a person is trying to collaborate with somebody else, they just want to get it done quickly so this other person can get the slide so they can do it in time or edit the document. And they're not always thinking about all the, the most restrictive permissions. They just want to get the job done and want to share it. And so they might actually accidentally overshare on either authorized or unauthorized SaaS service.
So would you agree that the approach of looking at the full security lifecycle is something which is the basis of protecting against those, unsanctioned SaaS applications, making sure your data is protected regardless of where it is?
And it's absolutely critical. So as we take kind of another look at that life cycle on the next slide here, we have the discovery. That's where it goes from shadow IT, and then we do the investigation to get it into sanctioned. And then we start being able to take control over it and actually set those policies. And then, of course, we have the alerts that we then manage to. And so the interesting thing that, and this is Microsoft Cloud App Security is, helps guide you through this. That's one of our capabilities that helps manage these SaaS applications. And it really helps walk you through that life cycle. And the interesting thing that I particularly like about it is, in addition to sort of getting you that visibility and control, it's also an investigation tool. And SOCs, Security Operations Centers, are able to use this for a lot of functions of how you would monitor your applications in that software as a service world. Because you can get visibility into what threats are happening. It's got integrated intelligence about, the bad IPs, the bad URLs, and all these other threats, and it can integrate with all those kind of pieces. And you can also track. So, say there's an attack on your organization, and they've compromised, say, 5 accounts, and they're accounts of concern. How you can then monitor what those accounts have had access to. And so we know that over the past 3 days, this password was compromised. What has that account touched? What has it used? And so you can get a lot of information on the scope of it through the tool. And so it's even once you even get past the stage, that kind of functionality is very, very powerful for security. As you move your organization to the cloud, I want to be able to manage my security on an ongoing basis, and that's one of my favorite tools, because it provides that versatility to help with all those different functions across your organization.
And Mark, I believe the other thing to think about is it's a classic big data issue, right? So you have so much of data. How do you go about analyzing? The traditional approach of just correlating it manually is not going to work anymore, right? We're all familiar with, let's say, an attack like Snowden. Right? How do you go about creating those baselines, understanding the user behavior, so when an anomaly happens, it could be a user just showing up on Saturday morning and doing a massive download of data. Well, that's anomalous. You want to know about that, right?
Absolutely.
The other thing that I want to point out in context with our CASB solution is think about Office 365, right? So you have users who are logging in, maybe they're going and interacting with different applications, so whether it's SharePoint, whether it's Exchange Online, OneDrive, and so on and so forth. Now, from a visibility and security perspective, you want to be able to do what I call machine learning and big data analysis on the data, right? So you have this audit data which is available to you. This is a user who logged in. This is the file they opened. This is the file they edited, right? Think about the possibilities if you are able to bring all that information together and apply analytics to drive actionable intelligence out of that. So one of the things that we are doing with CASB is we can automatically, and it's just configuration based, right? We can automatically go and pull all that information on your behalf, your auditing data, your activity logs, do the machine learning, do the big data analytics on that, and give you actionable intelligence. That, hey, these are the anomalies, and those could be velocity checks in terms of, hey, a user logged in from somewhere in New York at 9 in the morning, and now they're 5 minutes later they're logging in from somewhere in Washington. Well,
that's not practical. Exactly.
Exactly, right? So the point being, you don't have to do that sort of analysis on your own. We have made it easy to where those capabilities are built into the platform.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that I love about what Gartner calls User and Entity Behavioral Analytics, UABA, which is part of the CASB, the Microsoft Cloud App Security, as well as our Advanced Threat Analytics product, is it helps you with that normal, because there's an old adage that collection is not detection. It's great that you have all the logs, but you've got to be able to do the analysis on it. You've got to be able to get to those conclusions, because an analyst can't look at 1,000 things a day, but they can look at 15 that have been pre-selected by the machine learning algorithms and the rules that you set and program and tweak and tune. you can look at that and say, you know what, I can go through these 15 and I can check in and see if this is really unusual or if this user just happened to have to travel to a different country that was unusual. And that was acceptable unusual as opposed to unusual and malicious.
Yep, absolutely. So this is where cloud app security fits into the overall reference architecture, right? So as you can see, that is very well integrated with Office 365. It's also very well integrated into our identity stack.
Yeah,
and
Azure
that's the
Active
only way
Directory,
that we're going to be able to provide, comprehensive value back to our
And
customers.
pull all those signals about the authentications, yep.
Exactly.
And the other piece is, we didn't quite frankly have room on the reference architecture slide, but there is also that element there of that threat detection, and it really is essentially a SOC tool and a useful one for that as you get your applications in the cloud.
So you're talking about sort of connectivity going in from here into your SOC that, hey, these are the threats, and we can provide you with seamless feed of what we are seeing in terms of threats into your SOC to enrich your investigation.
Exactly, and this becomes the visibility the SOC has been needing on how do I get access to what's going on in my software as a service world? How do I manage that? How do I monitor that? Well, the answer is, a CASB solution like Cloud App Security.
And this really also helps you sort of overcome a lot of that perception, right? So when the customers are thinking about moving their data into the cloud, there's a perception, how do I get visibility into what is going on, right? And this is just one step, further in that direction, if you will, to provide that visibility right back to our customers.
Exactly. Every time, or not every time, but frequently when I work with customers, one of their biggest concerns about going to the cloud is I can't provide the same level of assurances, the same level of control, the same level of visibility as I have on-premise today. And so that's where tools like the Cloud App Security really open that up and allow the security organization to say, you know what, I feel very comfortable with this. This is actually easier in many cases to do an investigation or to do threat alerting and detection on the cloud than it is on-premise. So I feel very comfortable green-lighting this project. And then that allows them to enable the business and say, you know what, go forth and do this this cloud project that you want to do the digital transformation, because I feel comfortable that I have the visibility I need to be successful there. And that's a very powerful conversation for a security organization to have, to be able to go to their business and say that.
So we're not just going to go and define these firewall rules to say the users can only go and talk to OneDrive, or they can only talk to these applications. We're going to empower the users to do the right thing to where they can go and access their application regardless of where they are. But we are going to provide the right visibility to make sure you have the right level of security built into that process.
And then we have all the monitoring that they want on what's happening at that app level, at that data level.
Mark, walk us through some of the challenges with the data and what is it that we are doing to protect the data, again, going from on-premises to the cloud, regardless of where the data is.
So the data piece is a very interesting one. Let's go ahead and build this out really quick here. When we look at the challenges that face data, it's one of the toughest things, because data is very important to the business, right? And the risk is, in an identity perimeter world, is that once the data leaves the control of the organization, then you don't have the visibility into it, you don't know what's happening, and it can be used and abused in ways that you don't want it to as an organization. And that's a tough challenge, because when you look at the classic approach of how do we go ahead and solve this problem, it always starts with data classification. And that's a massive project. That's a difficult project, and a lot of organizations don't try it. And of the ones that try it, many of them essentially fail, or the project stalls, because it's so difficult, because data is being generated all the time, and it's being modified all the time, it's being shared all the time, because that's how you create value with data, is that other people have access to data that's been created. And so it's a very difficult problem to solve from that traditional linear kind of waterfall approach. And what Microsoft has done is we've taken a very different view on it, because instead of trying to protect it using the application controls, using the device controls, using the infrastructure and server controls,
which you still need.
Which you absolutely need, and that's we want to leverage those investments that have been made there. But we want to actually take it a step further. We want to actually put the protection on the data. And so Microsoft has had a technology for a number of years, 5, 10 now, I can't remember exactly, called Rights Management Services, or RMS. And it was a great solution that had the encryption on the file itself, and then the file would essentially call back home to an RMS server to get the key to open itself up. So it was always encrypted, but the key was never stored with it. It was stored on a central server you could manage the policy on. And so it was a great solution.
But it relied on the user.
It relied on the user and it was also on-premise. So a few years ago, Azure RMS, so we now have it out there so it's available to anyone on the internet, which is great. That solved one of the big problems of it. But the other thing that we had that was a big challenge was we had to have people manually classify stuff. We had to have people choose to make that a protected document. That was a big challenge. So about a year or two ago, we purchased a company called Secure Islands. And this really helped solve a huge gap that really solved a big part of usability on this solution was it had auto classification. So as you're editing a document, as you're creating a document, at the point when it's being created, so it's not an artificial task later, it is scanning for the various things that would trigger a DLP, regex type of rules, that hey, looks like a social security number. This is a sensitive project name. These are the things that would signal that these are sensitive documents. That this isn't just a run-of-the-mill cafeteria menu. This is actually a very sensitive document, and then you can have it automatically classify that, and that starts the whole virtuous life cycle where it's then protected all the time as needed. It can signal the DLP that hey, you need to monitor this document if it leaves the organization. And then you can report on it in that central way, and you can revoke access. So say the document does get out and it goes to a place it shouldn't go. If you see someone trying to open it from some Eastern European country where you don't do business and you don't have anyone traveling, that might be suspicious enough that, you know what, we lost this person's laptop a week ago. This document decided it was going to be opened up there. We're going to go ahead and revoke access to it because we don't want that document being open, that sensitive document. And so it's that full life cycle approach. And the beauty of this, if you look at all those different icons there, that's just really symbolic. It doesn't matter whether it was on a USB stick. It doesn't matter whether it was on an unmanaged device. It doesn't matter what's on Shadow IT because that document's always phoning home. And it will not open up, depending on your caching policy, and unless you actually are able to prove that it's good and it passes all of those policy checks. So this really gives you that ultimate control over the data and visibility over that our IT departments and IT security departments have been needing for a very long time. Because once it left that traditional perimeter, there wasn't much that could be done.
So Mark, that's great. Let me try to summarize that. I heard two key things there, right? The first one is labels.
Yes.
So we are doing the classification. We are adding those labels at the very get-go of when the data is being created.
Yep.
Right. So we're not waiting for some engine to, be part of that process somewhere in the middle and figure out what that classification is going to look like. As the user is creating that document, so whether it's Microsoft Word, maybe PowerPoint, and so on and so forth, we're just labeling the data right there.
Automatically.
Now,
right? You can override it because you own the document, but it automatically will get that classification if it hits those things as it's created, not if it's emailed or if it goes this way or if it's not on a USB. It's as it's created.
Right there.
Yes.
The second key thing that I noticed was now we have the ability to create these policies which can travel with the data. That's the key, right? That's the game changer, right?
Policy-driven encryption. It's not just encryption, it's policy-driven.
So regardless of where your data is, it is always protected, right? So unless and until you are authenticated and you're authorized to access that information, it's just going to be some encrypted blob, even if you have access to that data.
Exactly, and then it's an intelligent encryption because it's got that policy that says who can open it, who can't open it, and then they have to authenticate, again, bringing in that identity aspect to the perimeter. You have control through your identity and your identity controls and protections that add an additional layer on top of that encryption to make sure that, you know what, this account is secure and protected, and only this account can use this data. It's a very, very powerful capability for organizations. As you can tell, it's one of my favorite capabilities from Microsoft.
I can see that. The other thing that I wanna point out is, so we also understand that our customers have a very heterogeneous environment, right? So it's not that they are going to be using our DLP engine all the time. If you guys are using, Office 365 DLP, that's great. We can leverage those labels and we can, provide you with the capabilities to define those policies as to how do you go about protecting the data, right? But at the same time, the fact that the labels are created, they're attached to the data, gives you the ability to use any one of those third-party DLP engines as well to integrate with this process.
Yeah, so if you've got processes built around that and all those sensors and you want to know if it ever gets emailed, all of those things are completely valid and it's easy to have them pick up on it. The last point before we switch to the next slide I want to cover is the format support. Obviously, Microsoft Office documents natively built in, beautiful experience. But through partner capabilities, we can also do PDF and AutoCAD, and we're continuing to work on more formats as well. But we found that most sensitive documents, most documents of interest, unstructured data, are either in Microsoft formats or PDF or AutoCAD. Those tend to be the 80% plus case that we see of sensitive documents. So, we got a lot of coverage there, not just in our own capabilities, but also that partner extension into the PDF and AutoCAD world, which is very, very critical for our customer success.
Now let's bring it back together from the context of what does the typical story of a file looks like. So if you think about it, and Mark, earlier you were talking about it, the file is created, right? Great. And it's not going to be useful unless somebody is going to go and use that file, use that data, right? So somebody would open that file, they'll do, share it with other people in their organization,
maybe with their partners. They'll email it, yes.
Exactly. And it's also possible that that other person may open it up on different devices, whether it's a mobile device, whether it's desktop, whatever the case is. The idea is that the sharing of that particular information will just keep going. Right? It's an ongoing process.
And that's how the business is creating value, by sharing those insights, exactly.
Absolutely. So the value that we are trying to bring back to our customers is, again, going back to the initial creation of that file and the fact that we are able to do the classification and create that label at the very get-go, then gives you the ability to protect that file or protect your data at each and every stage of the life cycle of that given file. So whether it's going through an email, so you can use Office 365 DLP to leverage those labels and create those custom policies, make sure your data is protected.
Yeah.
Or again, going back to CASB as well, right? So we talked about sort of this data leaving your organization and going into this third-party SaaS application. So of course, if you have these labels and you have the ability to go and define policies which says, hey, you know what? This is most sensitive information for my organization. This type of information cannot leave on-premises environment. Well, now you can go and define those policies. That's one.
Exactly.
But number two, you now also have the ability to say, you know what, I just want to do a search of, I want to know where all my sensitive data resides across all of these SaaS applications.
My sensitive, my confidential, my secret, my highly sensitive, whatever your label or classification is, you can get visibility across that whole spectrum.
Absolutely, and that's the connected value that we want to bring back to our customers, right? So it's not just about creating these siloed cybersecurity capabilities, but it's also about connecting all these dots together, and not just within Microsoft capabilities. Again, we want to be supporting those heterogeneous environments, right? So we talked about these third-party DLP engines. So that's the direction that we are taking. Make sure that we are able to provide you with the maximum ROI out of your investment with us and other security vendors.
Absolutely.
Now, what does that mean from a business perspective, right? What is the value? And again, it's all around secure collaboration. How do you enable and empower your employees to be able to securely share your information across multiple users? Again, whether it's employees, whether it's your customers, whether it's your partners, or other types of users. So let's take a look at the business scenario, right, as to what this capability means from a business value perspective. So in this particular scenario, you can see Sue has created a document, right? And Sue has shared the document with two different people, Bob and Jane. The beauty of this capability is that Sue can actually choose to assign different privileges to the same document for different users. So as you can see in this particular scenario, we have Bob who can view and print that particular document. At the same time, we have Jane who only has the capability to edit and print that particular document, right? So this is sort of these granular permission and the capabilities which are built into this Azure Information Protection Platform that allows you to securely collaborate with different users in different ways.
Yeah, and because you've got the basic business value of, hey, I can say yes because I feel comfortable this data is protected. So security becomes a department of yes instead of a department of no. But additionally, you've given them control over their business data, and they feel comfortable that not only is this going to be generally encrypted, but I know that I have visibility into where this is going, and I know who has access to it and who doesn't, which is powerful for me if I'm launching, say, a new device where that launch is very sensitive and we're not ready to release it until the release date. I know exactly who has access to it, who's been looking at it, and what they can or cannot do with it. That's very powerful for people that are working with sensitive documents because they really care about the integrity and the confidentiality about those documents.
And the other thing is, any device, any platform, right? I mean, that's very powerful. So regardless of where the user is, regardless of the device that they're using, we are able to provide for that secure access to their application and
And
data.
they can open the dock wherever is convenient for them in a secure manner.
Absolutely, and that ties together with sort of increasing productivity and enhancing the user experience.
Cool. And this really fills in the information protection piece, and that's really sort of the core piece is a very strongly integrated strategy for Microsoft based on Azure Information Protection.
And again, I'm going to point out this connectivity, if you will, right? So going from EIP to CAS and then providing that overall visibility back into the SOC, right? So we're covering not just the security, we're enhancing the user experience, increasing the productivity, providing the right sort of controls, if you will, to protect your data regardless of where it is.
And tying into your existing DLP investments as well.
Absolutely.
So let's talk a little bit about devices. So devices is a two-part problem. One is I need really great managed devices that are both secure and usable and something that our users love to use for my corporate sensitive stuff. I need absolutely great devices for that. At the same time, I have to accept that my users and potentially partners are going to be accessing some of my data, my applications from a device that they own and they may manage.
Yep.
And so you got to solve both of those scenarios when you look at the devices space. And our approach, quite frankly, we bundled all of the stuff that we think is important into Windows 10 itself. And we want that great user experience, which we've invested very carefully in, and it's been a great experience for our customers. But we also want the strong hardware-backed protections, because software-backed protections and operating system protections have done a really good job against cyber attacks up until, I don't know, somewhere around 3 or 4 years ago, when the attackers have really stepped it up, and it became apparent that this was a business model, and they're willing to invest in whatever it took to compromise these devices. And so we've actually switched to a hardware-backed model where we can use the trusted platform model, or TPM chips, that are built into common enterprise PCs, and then we can create what we call virtualization-based security, or VBS, protections, and have that hardware backing for protecting your credentials, for protecting your accounts, for protecting the device operating system, for protecting the applications. And we've built all that in there, so it's very, very difficult for attackers to be successful with their attacks as they go after the users on those corporate devices.
And I would say that's really a good way of leveraging the virtual extensions, if you will, that has been available in the hardware for a long, long time. And I can think of one other company who was using those capabilities, but I think those are the areas where we have invested in to not just enhance the security, but also provide for a better user experience.
Exactly, and we're constantly releasing new uses of that hardware-backed security so that we can bring that hardware level of protection to all of the different security features that we've got. I mean, it takes time to integrate, of course. And then, of course, we have to assume failure, the old engineering kind of principle, or assume breach or assume compromise, as some people say. And we have to expect that some users are going to click on the wrong thing. Some of these attacks are going to be successful. We accept that. That's an assumption that we have to have in the system. And so we've built, through Windows Defender ATP, a phenomenal capability for detecting these advanced attacks. It's really focused on detecting them. It's not your traditional antivirus or anti-malware approach, but detecting those advanced attacks and then enabling those investigators to investigate and respond. It builds timelines for them. It does a lot of stuff to help those enterprise security defenders really be successful, and it's built right into the operating system. And that agent is just there, it's a part of it, it's integrated, it's not going to break a bunch of stuff, which, as you know, with security tools is always a risk. Do I want to add another agent because it could break stuff? And so we wanted to make sure that was a great experience, and then we, of course, hook it to a cloud service that provides that access to all that intelligence and analytics, and our threat hunters that are focused on helping make sure our customers are safe and providing those profiles and of the attacks and the intelligence into what these attackers are doing.
So what you're saying is detection, forensics, and analytics at cloud scale.
Exactly, and it's integrated into the operating system, so you don't have all the integration problems.
So I don't have to go and install an agent.
Exactly, it's all there. You just turn it on.
I only have 10 agents today, by the way.
Only 10? And then the second half of the problem is your mobile devices, or these unmanaged devices that come in. And of course, we have a mobile device management capability in Intune. But we weren't really happy with that. We wanted to take it to the next level because the experience that you get from a typical mobile device management is that you get a special app for your secure email, your corporate email, and that's how they keep the corporate or enterprise data separate from the personal data. And we wanted to actually take it to the next step. We wanted to actually manage the applications that were there that the users were using, as well as, of course, the Office applications, which we think have a great premium experience. We want to be able to provide management of that and put the security features in there so the users can use the apps they want and the ones that they're comfortable with, the ones that they're really productive with, and make that a secure experience. And so that's why we focus very heavily on mobile app management for the built-in mail and document editing in the Macs and the Androids, in the iOS devices, and the Windows components, in the different Windows distributions. We wanted to have that great experience there as well as the Office apps. And so that's where the mobile application management came in place.
And I think one of the other challenges that we can think of with MDM, it does provide a very good layer of security to protect the device itself.
Yep.
Fair? But from a user experience perspective, and I remember my days, 2 or 3 years ago, when I was using 2 devices, right?
Oh.
Because one was my corporate device, right, which was tightly locked down, and I could only do, so many things on that particular device. But I have a need to be able to go and check my personal emails. Maybe I have a need to go and
take
do something
pictures
on the
when I'm
internet.
on a trip, send it to my kids, yeah.
Exactly, right? So, having to carry those 2 devices definitely isn't a good experience, right? So when it comes to mobile application management, that's one thing that we are trying to do is how do we enhance that user experience while providing the right set of security controls, right? Which is, again, around, protecting your data, but how do you do it on one device where the data could be corporate data as well as your personal data, right? So those are the
Exactly.
things we are trying to do with mobile application management, and that's the reason we say that MDM is something which is needed, which is going to stay, right? Maybe for some of those business use cases. But the industry is really going forward with MAM, right? Which is more about taking this identity security perimeter-based approach. How do you go about protecting data? How do you go about protecting identities on that same device?
And we wanted our customers to have a choice. How do you want to do this? And then there's another piece to it, another piece to the puzzle, which is how do I secure the mobile device is the question we've been talking about. But how do I get security value back from the mobile device? How do I provide a useful signal so that I know if my user's coming from a secure mobile device when they're authenticating or they're coming from some unmanaged device or unmanaged PC somewhere else? And so that's where the policy enforcement with conditional access comes in. So one of the things that Intune does, which is our MDM MAM capability, Intune can pull a signal, it can evaluate, okay, is this device managed, is this device compliant, has it been jailbroken? There's a number of different signals that it can take off that device when it's being managed. And then it can use that signal and say, this device is registered in our Azure Active Directory, and this is the current state of the device, and it checks it and keeps that up to date. And that allows you, that's one of those very specific, very strong signals of is this device trustworthy? And stepping it up even further with a Windows 10 device, whether it's a PC or mobile device, or any other form factor actually, there's a device hardware attestation that can take that really strong hardware security for checking to make sure the operating system, et cetera, is all good when it boots up, and it can provide that access to Intune. Then Intune knows that not only is this not jailbroken, but it's actually been through this full boot sequence check, and we can take that hardware-based attestation, signal it into Intune, feed it into every Active Directory logon that happens on it, so we know this isn't just coming from a mobile device. This isn't just coming from a mobile device that hasn't been jailbroken. This is coming from a mobile device where we've checked the binaries with hardware all the way through the boot sequence. So it's a very powerful ability to really extend this story and get, if you want that super secure device with a great experience that goes anywhere, you can have that assurance that this thing went through a TPM check no matter what country it's in.
So I agree with that. I want to clarify one thing though.
Please.
So absolutely, like you said, if you're using Intune MDM combined with Intune MAM, you have much deeper capabilities, if you will, right?
Yes.
However, I want to make sure that we clarify that Intune MDM is absolutely not required for the customers to be able to use Intune MAM.
No, you can choose.
So you can use a MAM solution on top of your existing MDM provider as well, right? So if you're using a third-party MDM today, but you're looking at consolidating that user experience, right, and making sure that your users can use one device to be able to access corporate application, their personal application. You can define that boundary to where you exactly know how you are going to go about protecting your corporate data, MAM is a great solution for that, right?
And
So
you
you
can
don't
start
have to be
bringing
using
that user
MDM.
experience in, exactly.
Exactly.
And so this is a little bit deeper view into what we had talked about a little earlier. And there's a list there of all the various different hardware protections that are available in Windows 10, a number of those preventive features, and that's what we call our pre-breach capabilities. And then there's also the post-breach capabilities, which is, here's a set of capabilities that are available for enabling that investigation in case this device is compromised, because compromises do happen.
Mm-hmm.
And a couple just high points on the way that we approach this here is that Defender ATP agent that's built into it, we look at industry standard indicators of compromise, IOCs. They're great. Hey, this is a record of a past attack. See if this pattern applies to you, so that if the attacker uses the same pattern, boom, you've got a detection, community effect, network effect. Life is good because you get that detection for quote free. Then we also have this concept that we call indicators of attack, and this takes it a step further. Is even if we don't have the specific IPs, the specific stuff, kind of like an anti-malware signature that you have with an IOC, there's certain behavioral patterns, certain ways that adversaries use with binaries, certain ways that they construct stuff. There's a certain set of patterns that attackers fall into that, oh, this is this particular group because they use this type of malware, this type of compromise, this type of vulnerability. And so we have those profiles for these advanced attackers, for these known attack groups, and we build them in, and we have what we call indicators of attack. And this allows us, even if the attacker group decides that they're going to try 3 new things out of 20, we still know about those 17 other things. And so it doesn't have to be a perfect match like on an IOC, and then we have that ability to detect these attackers even when we don't have an IOC built, when they're doing something new. So this is a very powerful capability that's built into Defender ATP, and it's a very, very strong capability.
The one thing, also the connectedness, if you will, between Defender ATP and Defender, right?
Yes.
So if we detect something with Defender ATP, now you have the ability to go and send a signal out to Windows Defender in your organization to maybe block that, and block that across a number of devices, if you will, right?
Yep.
So you are able to take those actions with that connectivity layer that we have built across these different capabilities, whether on premises or in the cloud.
Exactly. And on top of that, in addition to just all that great detection stuff, we also have, we really focused on essentially the investigator experience. And our incident response teams that I mentioned earlier, they were instrumental in kind of building some of the requirements of, hey, as well as a number of our internal defenders on our different properties, what would you really want if you had one of these types of capabilities, and kind of set out the requirements. And a couple of those things around timeline analysis, like I want this to automatically be able to be a timeline of the attack so that I don't have to do it manually as an investigator. It's got things in there like that. It's got the ability to pivot. So if I click on a file name, I can see where all the other places the file name is. I can look at a host, see the other events on the host. A lot of capabilities there. We'll talk about them a lot more in the threat detection section, but just wanted to kind of give you guys a sense of how much we focus on making sure that front line, which is so critical in investigating these attacks, to get early into them, and how much we've really put a lot of effort into there, because this is what we see as success in
and
device
really,
space.
if you think from a detection perspective, there's no silver bullet out there, right?
No.
So one of the things that we do with Windows Defender, something we call block at first sight, which is we may come across, every now and then, across a binary or across a file which we don't know anything about, right? So we can leverage the scale of the cloud to send that file up to the cloud, do the analytics on it, whether it's detonating that particular file, gaining more intelligence, kind of figuring out if this piece of data is malicious.
Yes.
And once we do that, we can actually send the signal back down, and that's really block on first sight. So the first time we see that, hey, this is malicious, we are able to create sort of those protective signatures, if you will, for lack of a better word, and send them downstream in real time, so that it's not just that customer, but all the customers from then are protected.
And we're applying that network effect to security so that as we learn things, we can instantly protect it. And if you're, say, one of 1,000 customers, you've got 9,909 or 999. I lost my numbers there. So if there's 1,000 customers out there, and one of those other 999 hits something, you get a free detection right away.
Yep.
And so it's a very, very powerful set of capabilities. We'll talk more in threat detection.
Yep. All right, well, let's take a look at, so we talked about MAM, right?
Okay.
Let's take a deeper look into how can we leverage those capabilities to, again, provide for secure access regardless of where you're coming from, right? So in this particular scenario, we've got a device, and that device has corporate apps. You can see that, right? At the same time, the user also has some personal apps. And the goal, again, is not to create restrictions with security, but to provide for a much better enhanced user experience. So how do we do that? Let's take an example of Microsoft Word. The user may use the same application to access their corporate data. They could use the same application to access their personal data, right? And the challenge has been, how do you create those boundaries so that you know your corporate data is protected, and as an organization, you have visibility into what is going on with the data. And you really don't want to care about the personal data, right? But this is one app. So what we have done with MAM is sort of the ability to create subcontainers within that container, right? So think about corporate data sort of residing in a protected container where you can apply policies that, based on how the user has authenticated, or based on where the user is coming from, whether they are internal to your corporate network or whether they're outside of the corporate network, you can assign privileges, or you can assign.
So things like I can't copy paste from my corporate to my personal.
Exactly.
Okay.
So you can control that sort of behavior, right? Where you can say, as long as the user is staying within the corporate apps role, they can do the copy paste. So they may be able to copy, let's say, from this Word document to their corporate email. However, if they try to copy anything from the corporate document to their personal document, they won't be able to do that.
It blocks the data leaking out of the corporate container.
Exactly. So that is really our approach as to how do you go about protecting data, if you will, on the device, which is used for multiple purposes.
Very, very powerful.
Now, at the same time, you do have the ability to, again, we were talking about Azure information protection, right? So you do have the ability to go and, apply protection at the document level as well.
So on top of all that, you can then have the Azure information protection calling back and saying, does this user have access to it before it even opens up?
Absolutely. Now, if you think about combining these two capabilities together, they're very powerful from a security perspective. But more importantly, they're enhancing and improving that user experience, right? Now the user does not have to, a poor user like me, I really don't have to carry two devices. That's awesome.
And you don't have to worry about, even if you are on one device with an MDM, you can access your corporate email and your corporate documents through those nice, rich, constantly updated applications, as opposed to kind of a simple one that was been provided by the MDM provider.
So think about the application itself is security aware, right? So that's the change, where the application understands where and how to create these boundaries of separation between personal and corporate data.
Excellent.
So Mark, we have, from an identity security perimeter perspective, in this particular modules, we talked about our identity stack, right?
Yep.
So full set of stack, providing you with strong authentication capabilities.
Heart of the identity perimeter.
Threat detection capabilities, and so on and so forth, right?
Yep.
We also talked about how can we go about protecting the data, regardless of where the data is, regardless, whatever device the user is using to access that data, right? Protect the data across the entire life cycle of data.
Exactly.
We also talked about protection for third-party SaaS applications. So how do you get visibility into what SaaS applications are being used? How the data is getting in and out of your environment, if you will, and where all the sensitive data resides when it comes to this third-party SaaS application, right? So that entire life cycle of doing the discovery to giving the capabilities to apply the right set of security controls, and then the ability to go and detect threats, if you will, associated with your data and SaaS users.
Exactly. And then we closed on the devices. So those unmanaged devices, and how do you bring at least the applications, if not the whole device, into management so you can get the policy protections you want? And then how do you bring that great user experience for your corporate frontline, your Windows 10 devices that is as strong as you possibly can, but also acknowledges the assumed compromise principle so that you can then do those investigations quickly and get them back to known good, get back to operations.
Yep. And the last thing I would say is, again, the connectivity back into the customer SOC, right? Most of our customers, they have some sort of SIEM. They want central visibility, and they want to be able to use that single pane of glass, right? And we have invested to make sure that we are able to provide that seamless connectivity for the intelligence into the cloud and send it back to their security operations center.
So that they can see what's going on with their devices with the SIM integration, so they can see what's going on with their SaaS apps, with the cloud app security capabilities, and that keeps those security folks on top of what's happening.
So it's really, when I look at it, it's about how do you use security to break silos, and that's what we have talked about, right? So let's not think about security in silos around identity, data, devices, and application, but it's all about thinking about security comprehensively across those different pillars and connecting them together to get the best value.
Mm-hmm. And in the next module, we'll be talking about threat detection and focusing on how do we get threat detection across the kill chain and across all of your enterprise resources. Thank you.
Thank you.